question. So Adama is a film about a West African young man, and you're not West African. So what issues came up in creating a film about West Africans as an outsider?
I think, first of all, Julien Lilti, the scriptwriter, is not West African, but he has a family history that comes also from North Africa. And I think it's also one of the reasons he was so touched by these historical facts. I don't have that family history, but I would say that the fact that I discovered Senegal when I was still quite young, and the importance that it had in my evolution at the time, and also the fact that when I came back to France after having discovered Senegal, it gave me a complete different reading of my previous environments. It was like it opened my eyes to a whole part of what was already around me since I was a kid, even in my school, in the streets of Paris, everywhere. It gave me suddenly, I could see through a big part of the history of France in its relationship with Africa. And it was kind of, for me, trying to make a tribute to everything that I learned and when I was traveling there, and also try to share this experience of having my eyes being really opened to what was the common history that we share together. And maybe I could just add that as a graffiti artist, when I started with hip-hop in the 90s and I was a teenager, we really thought that hip-hop was our culture because that's the only thing that was around. You would either be a DJ or a breakdancer or a graffiti writer or a rapper, or you would be nothing. You had to choose, you know? And so I chose graffiti, but it took me 10 years to travel to Africa, understand that actually this culture that we thought was ours only was already been sort of mondialized, had been taken worldwide through the history of slavery, to the Caribbean, to United States, New York. Graffiti, for instance, appeared on Philadelphia and New York, then came to Paris, and then it became what I thought was mine. So it was also a way to pay tribute to everything that I shared, also even not knowing it, and try to tell others that they also shared it, even though they might not know it.
And then, so what kind of input did you have from the West African community, and do you know the reaction from it, or from that community?
I'm screening the film soon in West Africa, and it hasn't happened yet, so I'm curious about that. But as far as France is concerned, we had a really good response from the communities because it's a subject matter that hasn't really been told so much. We learn about the First World War, but we don't necessarily learn or teach kids about the involvement of Africa in the First World War. And so many people were quite thankful that we brought the subject out, even though the film is not a historical piece, it's really much a coming-of-age tale. But the response has been good. Many associations came in, and we had screenings also with former soldiers that actually, since First and Second World War, happened a long time ago. There's few survivors, but we met some soldiers that fought into the French colonial wars. So it was also very surprising again that to realize that France used colonial soldiers from Africa to fight colonial wars in Asia, for instance. So the response has been good so far, and it triggers some dialogues and brings up this subject matter, and that's what it was for. It was not to make a judgment, since, as you said, I'm not West African. It was just trying to make a tribute and bring the subject in light.
And then I'll do this. So you have the background in graffiti and very community-based, I realized. And I'm just wondering how important is it working with physical materials to your animation art making process, and also how did your background in graffiti, oil painting, and experimental film inform the making of Adama, a more finished traditional film?
As far as putting, you said materials in the process,
physical, yeah.
I would say for me it's very important because I really like working with a computer CG animation, but it's also something I can sometimes feel limits to. And I really like to have this input of, at the same time, very traditional techniques like clay sculptures, or also more experimental things like inks and ferrofluids, to bring a sense of accident, that we don't control everything. And for me, it's very important in art that we don't control everything. Maybe it comes from graffiti, the fact that when you go out and paint a graffiti, it depends on the environment of what's going to happen that night. Will there be a security guard or not? You always depend on that, and you have to deal with the environment also in terms of surface. You don't paint a frame. You don't paint an abstraction of an image. You paint on an actual surface. So I think that's really the reason. And sorry, the second part of the question.
Because it's, oh yeah, and then how did you incorporate that into Adama? But I guess it's just using those techniques.
Yes, I incorporated it at different levels in the sculptures, in the explosions for Verdun. Many different ways. Every time that I see a technique that might work better, I just put it in, and I don't ask myself, is it allowed? You know,
yeah.
I don't ask that question. I just wonder if it's gonna work, if it's gonna ring the right string for the audience.
And that, yeah, it was interesting to see your graffiti work, because it was with the show. It was very not, you know, you have a very collective relationship. And then thinking about the studio you're working in, and you created that same collective relationship, was kind of nice. Yeah. Also,
just for the collective thing, it's true that when you make an animation film, you have to work with, if it's a feature film, you can be a filmmaker for short films and you know how to do things by yourself or maybe with a couple of friends. And then if you go for a feature film, it's like 40, 50 people to deal with for a year. And it becomes very much a collective work. And for bringing people from outside the animation world brings also a good energy to these collective works, not only working with people that are specialized in animation, but for example, bringing people from my graffiti crew to the film. They never did animation, and so they bring a very different energy. They bring inks, dangerous materials that you're not supposed to bring in a studio, and everybody else, the 3D animators, they would line up to just check them out, see what they're up to, and it gives them inspiration. I think it's good for animation to have inputs from other forms of art.
And then where's the studio? It's a smaller studio?
The studio we worked in is in Réunion Island. It's an island that's in the Indian Ocean, not far from Mauritius, out of Madagascar. And it has the particularity of being a French island. You're technically in France. Maybe somehow like what Hawaii is to the USA. I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but you're in Europe. But you're not. You're in the Indian Ocean, and the community and the people who live there have been are from different communities, but they all arrived either through slavery, either through from India to replace slaves once slavery has been abolished. So you have people from Madagascar, East Africa, people from India, people from China, also people from France. And it all blends there, and it's still a part of France. So it was interesting for us to work there, not because we would send the work there and have it done more cheap. That was not the idea. We all moved there. Since it's France, it's the same kind of environment for working. And we all went there, and they created this studio to our own image, and didn't depend on an existing studio to work.
Yeah, the cartoon makes me think of the cartoon movie interview where your partner Julien Lilti talked about usually the process is you find a producer and you try to apply and get a producer, and then in a sense you're a client to them and you follow their direction. But you guys took a different route and sort of did it on your own. But then you did get some input from who was it? Torino Film and Group West?
Group West,
yeah. So how important was it to sort of keep control of it? And then also how important was it to get outsider influence?
I think we did it by ourselves, not really because we intended to do so, but basically because no one else was interested in working on that. On the first hand, we were really passionate about this story and we started writing it. And we were actually looking for a producer, but we couldn't find one at the beginning. So we applied to residencies, Group West, and then Group West took us to the Torino Film Lab. And it made us, it gave us the ability to keep on working on the project, to spend some time really focused on it, and having some inputs also from script doctors that work in these kind of residency places. And of course, it gives you deadlines. It helps you work because script writing can be a very difficult process, especially when you're by yourself. And then we met NAԻA Production around 2010, so 3 years in the process. I did a short film that I showed earlier with them, La Marche. And then they jumped into the project, and then we also spoke a lot about the script with Philippe Egg, the producer, and also Bénédicte Galup, the first assistant director. So it became, on the last versions, it became also a collaborative work together with the producer, which I think is important.
And what kind of research did you do into it? You said you didn't want it to be like a totally historical or period piece, but it sort of touched on more universal motifs, whatever. But I'm just wondering how important was the just historical of the costumes, the weaponry, that sort of thing?
Oh, we tried to be as accurate as we could. There's a lot of documentation about the First World War. People are really passionate about it, making reconstructions on the weekends, and they have, so you can have very precise pictures. There's been a lot of films done. It was harder to find a good documentation about the colonial Africa a century ago. And for that, we based our research a lot about Jean Rouch films, who did a lot of ethnographic films in the 30s. It's the most ancient footage that we could find, and also some photographies, but we also based our research on how it looks today. So, but it didn't matter to me because I wanted to make a piece that would speak about facts that are 100 years old, but also have it to ring as much as possible to what's happening today. And right now in Europe, there's a big subject matter about migrants coming actually from Africa to Europe, and the reason why the older brother of Adama leaves, we made it somehow similar to the reasons why economical migrants might live still today. So our research was based on all this.
And the characters are very solid in their relationships. How did you develop them or research them?
It took quite a long time, basically, but at the beginning we worked on archetypes of storytelling. We knew that, so Adam, the father and mother, brother, and then once Adama, once Adama leaves, we knew he would become part of a group of soldiers that would take him with them. And at the beginning, we knew we would have a tall one, a smaller one, a beggar, a fool. So those archetypes were the starting point, and then version after version, we built them from the inside, and also writing the script back and forth, trying to make connections from the end to the beginning, which would fill up the characters more and more. One of the characters was quite inspired by an actual artist called Oxmo Puccino. He's a French, originally from Mali, but French hip-hop artist, rapper, that we were really listening, and we offered him to play that role, that character that we made after his image.
Yeah, I was wondering too if there was people in your life that you saw in the characters, or a part of yourself, or something like that.
I think we all put a lot of ourselves in all our characters as filmmakers, and I did put a lot of myself in all of them, I think. So yes.
And then the casting of the voice of the actors, was it like with the hip-hop guy that you really respected, or how did you go about casting?
We had this guy we knew we wanted,
yeah.
and otherwise it was done in a classical way. we had a casting director called Marie Bureau, and she helped us find talents. And we worked mostly, and I had a specific constraints that I told her about the accents, that I wanted to be very a second layer of storytelling, that all different West African accents would make different layers of understanding in the film. So we worked mostly at the end with theater people, not necessarily dubbing animation people, because we recorded all the voices without having any images. We recorded them in a blank place, so that we could leave the people act and behave just the way they wanted. Of course, they were constrained by the microphone, but that's all. They wouldn't have to fit a precise timing to say their sentences that would match already something animated. We did the other way around.
And then you animated to the time.
Yes, it's a good way to keep the life and the spontaneity of the performance.
Okay. Oh yeah, and back to the cartoon movie interview, your partner Julien Liti also said that it's important to be very demanding of yourself and to look for things that are not easy to find, especially with coworkers that force you to endanger yourself. That's how you'll find the only truth and meaning of a project. How did you, working together, how did you end up challenging each other and sort of pushing it? Yeah.
At the beginning, we worked, I was mostly illustrating his story for the first couple of weeks of work together. That's the reason why he came to me. He saw one of my short films and he thought it could be a good match. So that's how I jumped in. And then after a while, since we constantly made changes on the script, I couldn't really illustrate it. So I just started to write together with him. And of course, I tried to bring visual ideas, and he had the script writing tools. But at the end, it became more of a collaborative process with of course, a lot of fights, disagreements. But it always stayed, I think, pretty constructive. And that's how we challenged each other, by disagreeing.
And then, so he had a script and he sought you out to do it?
Sorry?
He had the script already and he saw your film and he sort of
he had,
asked you to come on board?
So just to go back, he had met the grandson of Abdoulaye Ndiaye, which was in 1998 the last living foot soldier, African foot soldier that actually fought in the First World War. And this Abdoulaye Ndiaye was like 104 years old in 1998. And the French embassy was about to give him a medal because they found out that he was the last survivor. And on the way there, just a day before, he died while they were on the way giving him this medal. And he was living in West Africa at the time and heard about this story, and just went to the place and met the grandson of Abdoulaye Ndiaye and got the information that he never really told his story to anybody. And he wanted to tell this, since 1998, he had this idea of making a film out of it. And I think he thought about documentary, live action feature. I wasn't sure that was the right solution, and that's when, short before we met, he decided to make it an animation, and he started looking at animators and filmmakers, and that's how he saw my films. And then we met. So we met on that starting point that we would tell a story about the Black Force through the eyes of a young kid, and in a coming-of-age tale. And then there was, of course, some ideas of script writing, but it was a new start when we started working together.
And then, were you excited about the idea of working on a feature, or were you like, oh my God, this is crazy?
I didn't see it coming that it would be so big, so long to do it. We were just young, and we didn't know it was impossible, so we did it, you know. But now I know that it takes a lot of commitment, but it was never a problem for me, because it's something you learn. It's like coming out of school and still keep on learning. And what best way to learn than to actually do? And so that's also one of the reasons I think it took that time, and it shouldn't have taken a shorter time, because we also learned a lot of filmmaking while we were developing the project.
And then with all your testing and making the movie, is there anything after the fact that you wouldn't have done or would have done differently?
I think, I mean, I think every filmmaker has that. When you watch your own films, you only see the flaws. I wouldn't change much of the way it was done and the scale of it and the budget, which gave us a freedom to really also make a very classical film in terms of narrative and respect all the rules of filmmaking and looking at influences and saying if we do as good as that, it's already an achievement. But at the same time, bringing ideas like that not have necessarily been done before, like the sculptures and the inks. So it's hard to answer, but I think I would prefer make another film than to redo this one. You know, yeah. I've learned so much that now I want to use this knowledge to make another project.
Do you see more features in the future, or shorts? Or?
I've always been interested in different forms of art, such as installation, painting, whatever interests me. So, but in the last couple of years, I've only worked on that project. So now and it's just done. So I'm in a time where I'm also opening to other forms of art. I'm working for a dance piece right now as a live animator. I do animation live while the dancers are on stage. I'll do that for a while and then jump in probably another process of script writing. But now I know how long it is. So.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. And then, oh, I had another one. Oh yeah, what kind of funding did you get? The budget. People keep talking about how the budget was so small, but it seems so huge to me as a small-time filmmaker. Mm-hmm. But how did you go about getting it funded? And
I feel like you actually, because the film was 4 million euros budget, and people keep saying it's a small budget because they compare it to a Pixar film or they compare it to a 60 million big production. I compare it to films like Waltz with Bashir, which were done with half that money. So I think it was, I wouldn't say comfortable budget because it was a guerrilla kind of process. You know, everybody had to be involved, and we worked a lot. But it was the good budget for the project. He gave us enough freedom, and we got it funded. We were lucky to be in France and have. First of all, the CNC, which is the Center of National Center for Cinema, which is a system in France where when anybody gets to a theater and buys a ticket, there's a part of the money that goes to the CNC, and then that goes to funding new projects. So, and then it's a competitive process where you apply to this and you try to get money to keep on going. And we had a big help from them. And we also had the region where we worked in, which is the Réunion Island region, that helped us, TV channels, and also private money to gather the whole budget.
Nice. And then quickly, just back to your shorts, I was just wondering about the technique. Sometimes it looked like it was painted on a canvas or paper and then cells on top of it? Or is it, how did you combine the digital painting with your maybe scans of artwork?
It all comes together in the 3D software. Even the paintings, they're being done in a classical way, sort of painting inspired by Ghibli paintings, which are so good for backgrounds, or even Impressionism paintings. We had, of course, influences, but it was done really all together with the input of 3D, meaning that the people who draw the backgrounds, they would have a 3D layout for the perspective. Then we would, then they would draw and paint them. Then we would get them from them and project them on the 3D shapes to be able still to make camera moves into paintings. And the fact that it's a 3D environment makes us believe that they both belong to the same style. But I also wanted to use that difference of style between the 3D sculptures, characters, and the paintings to create a sort of an animated depth of field, because the film is very much based on the point of view of Adama. And I wanted to create that sense that as the further you go away from the camera, it doesn't get more and more blurry like we have an optical lens, but it gets more and more painted. So you're always in this bubble with him, and you always see the world through his eyes.
And then, do you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers who are trying to maybe create something of this scope with little means, little funds?
I've had people speak to me about it. I just, unfortunately, generally tell them, are you prepared to spend quite some time on it? That's mainly, you need to know that it's going to take quite a while. But at the same time, when I say this, I'm remembering that I didn't know. So it's hard to say. It really depends on the project. But I think any aspiring filmmaker should not think too much of the constraints. It should think about really what they want to do in the first hand and make the world sort of have to reorganize around it. Because if you follow what's there, people tell you that it's not possible. You hear that all the time. We make a first feature film for me, for the scriptwriter, for the production company. It's about an African kid in the war. Who is it for? Is it for adults? Is it for children? Okay, it's for both. Yeah, but it's hard to make a film for both audiences. People always come to you with impossibilities. So you need to just, but actually, if you have enough perseverance, you can impose things and you can change those rules. And I think many films did that in the history, so you should look at these.
And what was your intended audience for the film, and how did that affect the making of it?
There's two main audiences. It has very much an educational purpose. We want not to teach, but we want to have people to know about this subject matter, at least, just to know about it. We don't want to tell them what to think about it. We just want them to know about it. So starting 8, 9 years old, we did a lot of, so far, educational screenings with schools coming in with teachers that also work on the film afterwards. It can be a great access for them when they study the First World War to see that side of it too, which is not really in the history books for school. And then, of course, that's not all. I mean, it's definitely, we wanted to tell a universal story about a kid growing up. So we also, and there's always a double reading in the film where the action takes place, but also you can interpret it. And for instance, the migration thing, the clandestinity, all that is layered in there, but the kids might not see it. The adults might see it. So so far, I'm happy about the career that the film has in festivals. It's just been released in France, so we can't really tell about the proper releases. But in festivals, it goes sometimes to children film festivals, sometimes to animation film festivals, sometimes to live action like San Sebastian, where it went into like the open category for more experimental projects. And in Stockholm, it goes to a migration spotlight. So the film travels to different layers of audiences, and I'm happy about that.
Nice. And I think it's time to open it up to questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, so if there are any questions in the audience, there's a microphone right there in the spotlight. If you want to go up. Anybody?
It's coming to you, I think, no?
Oh, no.
Oh, you have to go. Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I got it here first. So are there any other artists out there that you're really dying to work with?
This film was an opportunity to work with all the artists, the sculptor you've seen was my teacher, Oxmo Puccino, the rapper that I mentioned. I'm really a fan, so I already kind of use the opportunity to work with them. There would be many artists I would like to work with. It just depends on the project.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tiny. So my question for you is, what has inspired you to progress your styles over the years? Have you been influenced by other artists or just experimented?
I think it has a lot to do with both. Of course, I'm inspired by many different artists, especially in the research to this film. We got to watch many other films, and it goes from Tarkovsky's first feature, Yvonne's Childhood, to Truffaut, 400 Blows, to also, I mean, it goes everywhere. I'm like an antenna to catch everything that I see, and when you have a long-term project going on, it's like you can pick up ideas constantly and put them in your project. So yeah, it's a lot of inspiration, but it's also a lot of experimentation. Experimentation is just fun, so I just like to do it. I just like to try things out, not knowing where it leads, just for the sake of it. And for example, the ferrofluid ink work, we were just gathering with Turk, one member of my crew, and we were just, he came up with these products, magnets, and we would spend nights and nights doing it, and we have hours of footage. And then we just put them online. You know, it doesn't get many views, but it's there. And then someday it suddenly rings with another thing, and you say, okay, I could use it for that. So I think it's a lot of experimentation as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering if there was a big change between kind of directing your own, the small student films that we got to see, and then suddenly having this incredibly big project, and also what sound was kind of like doing your own small films and then working with sound designers and musicians.
Mm-hmm. There was a very big change, being that the short films that I've shown were mostly done by either mostly by myself or with a maximum of 5 people team. So it's a very different thing to do that than doing a feature film where you will have to work with at least 40 to 50 people. And the risk when you switch to the small size project to the bigger size project is that it's harder to experiment when you have a big pipeline, because it's like a factory. You know, your shots coming, you have 1,000 shots, you have 12 months for like it is here, and they just have to go through constantly, and you can't stop them each and, you know, start tweaking them by yourself. You have to go into a very solid process of checkings. And so as a filmmaker, it becomes much more an experience of explaining what you want than just to do it. You have to be much less autistic about it, you know. You have to be able to explain what you want to different people, make sure they're understood, and because otherwise it gets frustrating. You didn't explain well enough, they didn't understand well enough. It comes back, it's not what you want, you get angry, and that's the best way to fail. So you have to, instead of drawing all the time, you get into much more interactions with the people. I really try to keep 2 hours a day where at the end of the day or on the Saturday or Sunday to just take some shots, you know, that I didn't really have time to explain whatever tweaks I want to do them by myself. But that's just me. But you wouldn't even need to do that. You could do it all by talking. But it has to be well prepared. For the music part and sound, I always was interested in sound. That's definitely the difference between short film projects is that it got more serious. We took more time, but I was always interested into sound designing the films, because I think it's very interesting in animation that you start from silence and you build it all from scratch, and it's really impressive how much of the image can change when you reach the sounds aspect. So on this film, I was lucky to work with he doesn't like to be called that way, but I say sound designer, sound creator, and a composer. And they did an amazing work. But I was happy to have done the short film before, where I was really trying to record my own sound with a friend, and so that I had a common language with them. Not as much with the musician, unfortunately, because I'm not a trained musician. So it was really hard to express what I wanted, which comes back to what I said at the beginning. The more you know about every aspect of filmmaking while you're studying, the better you will be able to explain what you want. So the composer was kind enough to be patient that I would just tell him things that he probably hurt his ears, because I couldn't really explain what I wanted to change in the music. It was also thanks to the editor of the film that I was really able to collaborate best with him, because it was a three-direction thing where he would send music clips. The editor I wouldn't listen to them at first, and he would put them in a timeline in different ways and have me watch the film, because I've always been a visual kind of audience. And the composer would always tell me, oh, we should do, in this film, like this music in that film, and oh, I have to watch it again. I don't remember about the music in that film. So that was kind of a weakness I had, but thanks to the editor, I was able to collaborate much better with the composer, and I knew him from even before the script was done, so it was all right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nate. I've got a question about some of your experimental work in the films. I thought that the ink work with the magnetic ink and the sand was particularly interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to that process and use those materials, and maybe explain some of the other experimental work that you've done?
Mm-hmm. So as I was saying, this project of ferrofluid, it was a side project that I had with one of another graffiti artist, and we were doing it just for experimenting, just buying new inks, trying to see whatever we can try and see what it looks like. And at the same time, we were looking for documentation about the First World War and the aftermath of the battlefield. And at some point, I realized that the battlefield after the fight was so destroyed, and it was so out of scale that when you see a photographic plate from 1916, you would even know if you look at a lake or at just a little puddle. You don't know. There's no scale anymore. And it's also something that's in the ferrofluid work. We work with macro lenses on very small things. But it didn't matter anymore, because there was a relationship with breaking the sense of scale in both. And there was also very graphical similarities, quite stunning similarities of dirt exploding and just some metal powder on a magnet. And that's just how I suddenly started to think of doing all the war part like that. But it's always mostly due to the script writing, because we knew that we wanted the war part to be the last step of Adama's initiation. And in the last step of initiation, the kid inside you, you experience a sense of death, and the sense of birth as an adult. You lose the sense. So it all. If you looked at it on the text, it just made sense to make this last war scene as a trance scene, almost like a rich rite of passage. And it was a good way for me to represent it, because it would still look enough like the trenches, so you could still refer to it as what it was, but it would emphasize the chaotic aspect of what it must have been, instead of showing the actual death, the actual horrors that it was. And it also made a way to show it in its violence, but at the same time still staying accessible to young audience.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, how you doing? I really enjoyed your film.
Thanks.
I was just wondering if you could talk about some of your creative habits, like just artistic practices that really serve you well when making a feature, and maybe some of the habits that you don't like that really slow you down.
I would say a few years ago I would have answered that like you should draw all the time. Drawing was my main way of getting inspiration and going to, also have an interest into the outside world. I would draw things just to look at them. So that would be my habit, and I think it feels in the film because I was able to work a lot on the storyboard aspect of it. And so the framing has a lot to do with drawing. As for the habits that I don't like, I mean, I don't like being, how would I put that? I don't like when a software tells you what you should be doing, you know? It's kind of, it's what I mean is that when you make a 3D modeling, for instance, the software tells you you have to start with a sphere. And you can click the symmetrical option because it will be twice as fast. So make it symmetrical and make it flat, or make it, you know, because the software has been built in a way that you don't really necessarily have being conscious about it, but it's taking you somewhere. And sometimes I get annoyed by that, so I decide, okay, we'll skip the modeling. I'll do it in clay, and then, you know, and use the software, use the tools, the technical tools, as friends, you know, dance with them. Don't try to tell them, don't try to force, because if you want to make asymmetrical stuff, stuff that has bumps in 3D, it's going to take you so long. And it will all be artificial because you will have to decide on every bump. You have to put it where it is. As opposed to make a sculpture, maybe it's going to fall, and you'll catch it back, and suddenly it has the right shape, you know, and okay, don't touch it. And of course, you have that. If you make experimental work, you can make glitch work. And I like glitch work a lot. I like David O'Reilly's work. I like all this kind of filmmaking. But it's not the same thing. It depends on the project, I guess.
Thank you.
Hi. Being a polymath, what type of skills carry over or techniques to, I guess, drawing or animating or even?
Sorry. Can you say it again? A polymath?
Yeah. I noticed that as you're playing the video, you mentioned a lot of set of skills that starting out artists generally just don't have. You can animate, you can sculpt, you can. So I guess like in relation to drawing and sculpting or anything else that you might know, what skills or unique techniques might carry over between the two or others?
First of all, I like to say I like to try many different things, but it makes me not being an expert in any of them, you know? That's the problem when you do different things. So I guess it's really a matter of finding the best person in every field to work with, because and just know the tool enough so you can interact with them. So does that answer? Sorry, I'm not sure I got the second part of the question.
I guess it kind of helps, but thanks though.
No, but please, I'd like to answer properly. Can you help?
I guess I'm starting out trying to learn multiple programs, and instead of just focusing in on one thing, I'm doing them at things that relate at the same time.
Yeah.
So, like animation, doing video work. Something that I didn't even know about is how you went and sculpted and sort of made a shortcut instead of making each individual bumps. And like I've worked with clay, but I haven't, I guess, gotten to that extent of being just being familiar with it. So I guess.
I think what I could say is that all those things. I mean, we now work on computer. Okay, it might not be really good for health, but we do it. Once you're in a computer, what difference does it make to switch from Photoshop to NAИA? It's just a click away. So it really comes from that, is that those things that were so different 10 years ago, doing 3D or doing 2D, I've learned 2D animation on my laptop, using Flash, for instance. So I'm part of this generation where we just, you know, they told, my teachers wanted me to put a sheet of paper in between every finger and flip it like that, but as soon as they would look the other way, I would just go back to Flash, because I was on my laptop, then I could send Flash to Photoshop, make some textures. So I think it's very much like, I think filmmaking has always had a big relationship with technique, and we're currently living a time where everything happens in one place. You know, it's a screen, and it's almost going to be our phone soon. So I say if you have an interest for different things, I mean, you shouldn't consider it as a problem at all. Even though some people might think it's a problem, I don't think it's one. You should just follow that, and if that's how you get your inspiration, then okay.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks. Hi, my name is Sandino, and I'm a very amateur animator, and I've seen a lot of the Gobelins School's animation. In fact, I've been following one of the students, Joel dos Reis Vergas.
Mm-hmm.
He's working on an independent project called Urbans. And I just wanted to ask, from Gobelins, what kind of things or what kind of techniques, skills did you get from Gobelins? Like, what did they teach you, and what could you share on like things that maybe people don't know or people don't realize when they think of animating?
Okay. Gobelins School, for those who don't know it, is a school based in Paris. It has 25 students every year, and it has a good reputation, and I think it comes from the fact, one of the fact is that they teach you the skills. Before, you don't really, when you study there, you don't really speak about what does it mean, your work, you know, it's kind of, okay, you learn how to do it well. It's a culture that comes from the fact that they would mostly teach people to become animators, for instance. And so I actually liked that, because they told me how to do things, but they didn't interact. They didn't tell me what I should do. And so I think it's a part of the specifics of Gobelins. And as a student there, it was a right balance for me to make the exchange program in my last year in CalArts, because there I jumped into another culture of studying, where suddenly in the same place there was experimental school, theater, dance, music, video, and of course animation. But since I came from an animation school, I used all the other things. So I think Gobelins has the specificity to teach you skills and such as drawing, because I think drawing is not the end of what, for me, drawing is not the end point. It's just a tool. It's just something, if you know it, it might be easier. Sometimes you say, okay, I draw too much, I should stop, because it also takes you somewhere like 3D or like anything. But if you manage to keep the balance, the more skills you have on softwares, drawing, I guess for me, the more freedom you get when you want to start telling stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you maybe, like, did Gobelins at all teach you like certain things, like kind of secrets in a sense, like things most animators don't know?
No, it's not the Shaolin Temple of animation.
I was hoping it was.
There's no secrets at all. It's just I think it's just highly competitive to get in. So they have this luxury to take students out of other schools and take like the best students out of other schools to take them in their school, and they don't start from scratch with students there. It's also one of the reasons when you see Gobelin films, sometimes they stand out of other student films, but it's because of the way it is. It's the only public school in France, and it's a few students. So people study 4 years in other schools, graduate from other schools, and then they apply because it's so hard to get in. So I think that's the secret of it, really, is that you learn more from other students there. No, I wouldn't say that because you also have people coming from outside, and it's only professionals that come and teach, and they come teach for 1-2 weeks between their projects. So it's a good mix of all that makes it the way it is, but there's no secret, sorry.
All right, thank you.
Drawing might be their secret. They take people who draw. That's the first thing they look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for those great questions, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and yeah.
Great.